Hello everyone. So here we're gonna look at the Java programming, and basically our main focus in this lecture gonna be object-oriented concepts. So and some more concept about the methods, and also how to use different methodology during the programming. So let's get started. So dear student who have a little knowledge of the object-oriented, as I just mentioned in the classroom, a little bit about that, they're gonna find it very useful. However, I'm gonna tell you again everything from beginning and assume that you don't know about object-oriented. So let's get started. If you have written simple Java program, so then you will sometimes get confused that when you see more than one or two classes. So that's why in this lesson, we're gonna focus especially in the main concept about the methodology and how you can use different functions, how you can create different classes, and how you can actually access to an object inside a class. So in your life, you learn about many types of animal, people, buildings, and sports, school, and so on. So in English class, we refer to these people, places, or things, we refer as a noun. So in Java, we can refer to them as object. So that's why we're gonna look at the object in more detail. So Java programs revolve around object, like English sentences revolve around nouns. You can describe a noun with adjectives, and you can describe an object with field. Otherwise, these fields are known as an attribute or instance variable. So nouns perform actions with verbs, just as objects perform action with functions or methods. As you know, there are three base types or classes of nouns: people, places, and things. And from those, you can make infinitely more classes of noun. So Java has a similar idea about the word. So there is a single base class of object from which we can make infinitely more classes. So in this lesson, we're gonna learn what is classes in Java and how you can make an object from classes. We're using the object-oriented language which developed to solve the program involving developing softwares. And if you want to use object-oriented design, object-oriented programming must be used. So that's why, as I mentioned earlier, we're gonna use a developer tool which is known as Java programming, and we're going to use Eclipse. So Java is the most widely used object-oriented programming language, and object-oriented programming is a programming model based on the concept of objects. So what are objects? So objects are simply data structures that have fields or attributes in the real world. As I said, like places, person, and animals or things that hold information about the data, and method can be applied on them. So actually method shows their behavior. So the attribute of an object are variables that hold information or data about the object, while its method are ways the subject can manipulate its data to create new data. So this is important actually, because we can use this data of a structured data to have a proper, flexible, dynamic coding, and it's gonna make our life much easier. While everything in Java is not just objects, most things revolve around object in Java, like contents of an English instance revolve around the nouns of sentence. For this reason, it's important for us to know how to create objects and make use of them. So this is where the class come in. A class in Java is simply a template for creating objects with similar attributes and behavior. So a Java class actually can be thought as a template that define the attributes and behavior that object constructed from it can exhibit. With saying that, we can also consider an object as an instance of a class. So from a single class, we can create or construct many instances. And each instance have the attributes and functionality that every other instance of the class has. Thus, a human can be considered is a class and can be considered as a class. For example, human class. So if you look at one object like person or human, then we're gonna have different noun, right? Like eye color, hair color, age, weight, height, and many properties or states. And what are the attributes? Attributes are some fields that gonna give a meaning to those objects. And what are behavior, action, or method? So is the verb actually in English. So when we say eating, sleeping, walking, studying, so we mean we are using methods within a class and based on different objects. So from a single class, we can create or construct many instances. And each instance has the attributes and functionalities that every other instance of that included. So making a class in Java is easy. There are three key parts of every class, but only one is always necessary. I'm going to tell you in a bit. So a class can have fields or attributes, methods or behaviors and must have at least one constructor. We're gonna go step by step through this concept. We can create a class that defines the attributes and the behavior of a human or that person as an object. So you can look at this particular example. Making object from the classes is gonna be the name of the class gonna be human, and then we need to provide and declare variable and assign some value to that, which is attributes. And then we need to add constructor, and we need to add methods or behavior or the verb that I mentioned earlier. So in here, you can see, I'm gonna explain that we created a simple class, all right? So the public keyword on the state of the first line, so actually, what does it mean? So it means that class can be accessed from anywhere in the program. And if the name of the class is in upper case, then we do have a proper class name which we can refer it. So this is some rules that you need to obey. So between the opening curly brackets and the closing curly brackets in here, you do have something and you need to do something. So we have to define attributes and of any object or instance, so which can be constructed from the class and can have many methods. So before we can create object from this class, we will need to finish explaining this class. So let's look at the class fields or instance variable. In here, you can see that these fields will hold information about every instance of our human class, but they do not yet have the information because the class is simply a template. Well, we need to create a constructor at this point, which will allow anybody who calls it to pass in the necessary information about the instance of the human class. So how we can do that? Let's take a look at that. So at the time of constructing an instance of the class, we will assign the given information, values to the instance variable of the instance, and more. So we declare the variables. So let's look at the wider view of this class, human class, which can be accessed from anywhere. That's why it's public. We do have a public and private classes. When we want to have access to this class during the one Java code, so we need to define it as a public variable. So a class must be defined as an instance actually, and then need to provide a constructor which is used to create a new object from each class, and then every object created from a class is referred to as an instance. Yeah. So what is the constructor? A constructor is simply a method that can be called from different parts of your program. So for example, you have a class of human, you have another class of the animal, and you have another class of for example, books and something else, right? So you need to have a constructor, so actually to do something, right? Like a methodology. So although we have not covered methods yet, it is good to know that methods have return type that tell the caller, I mean the class which call that method, which tell the caller what data type to expect back as a result of calling the corresponding method. However, some methods don't return anything, which we call them void. I'm gonna look at this in more detail for you later on. So we're gonna learn more about return types in the methods and dot notation later. So let's go back to define our constructor, right? So the constructor has no explicit return type because it's a factory method. What does it mean? It means that it creates a new instance of the class and returns the new instance to the caller. So the constructor of the class must have the same name as a class. So you need to be careful. So if you want to define a constructor, you need to use the same name of the class. So you can create a constructor for human class that asks the caller to provide the name, age, and height of the new human instance, like this that you can see in here. The constructor can be thought of as a doctor who asks you about your name, age, and height, right? And sometimes a doctor who gives birth to your new object, your child, which is an object, and all the doctor asks is that you fill out the birth certificate to describe your new object or your new child. So the constructor parameter says that if anybody wants to create an instance of our human class, they must provide a name, age, and height for the new human instance as an arguments in here, right? So let's look at this. The next one, you can see the arguments that I talk about. So in here, for giving birth to a new child or new object, we're gonna use this syntax. Then the arguments should be the name, age, and height. So which is 5 foot. Once the constructor is done and created a new object or new child, it returns the child to the caller to be saved to a variable for later use. In here, the caller is the main. So all of you familiar with this type of syntax that we say whatever we want to execute should be in main. But where are the classes? Classes is outside of main, but main is a caller which call a class. How? This is the syntax for calling a class. The keyword this in the previous slide that we use tells the compiler that we are referring to the current instance of the class. So if we want to refer to the name field of this new human object, we say this name, this dot name. So the compiler doesn't confuse it with the name parameter that is provided as an argument to the constructor method. So let's look at the instance methods. Let's go a little bit deep down to methodology and how to use methods in object-oriented programming. Also, I ask you to remember that nouns perform actions with verbs in the sentence, and objects in Java program perform action by use of their methods. A class defines methods. Any object constructed from the class can be performed based on the method. These methods are referred to as instance methods because they can only actually be performed by an instance of the class. So we are all instances of human class, so we share functionality or methods. We are eating, we are sleeping, all of us, and we are sharing some common methods. And sometimes we speak, we jump, and we work, and so much more. All of these actions are predefined by our human biology and anatomy. I mean our classes. So here, the open and close curly brackets define scope. The opening starts the scope and the closing ended. Classes and methods, among others, have a scope, and the class scope is the highest level scope in a class. While we can start new method scopes in the class scope, we cannot start new method scopes in a methods scope. So, do you get it? All right, I'm gonna explain it. So we can add methods to our classes in Java. Let's add a few methods to our human class to make our human object more functional, like this. So let's go to see what does they mean. Actually, as I said earlier, the human being is gonna do something in common. So we're gonna speak, we gonna have a name, and we gonna have an age. So what does it mean? The first class, the speaks one, is telling the caller that during this function, during these methods, what's gonna happen and what is the outcome. It's public, can be accessible from anywhere within the Java programming, and is void, means no return. When you do not have any return syntax and object, then you're gonna have void function or method. So let's look at the first one, speak. Speak is gonna execute the print. It's gonna execute hi, I am, and what is the name? The name is a variable that needs to be defined beforehand, but doesn't matter. So one method in here is not depend on the all other variable. So you don't get any error if you have this, because it can be declared in main. So here we are just inside a class which is defined after the main class. So here we can see another one. So public void set name, and then we have an argument in here, which is new name as a string. So what is gonna be performing here is gonna set the name of the human object. So this is the name of the method, and here is whatever it needs as an input. So we need an input, new name, and we need to assign it to this name. This means this class, right? When we are in the class, we can say this name. Alternatively, you could say in here, instead of this, you could say human.name. Doesn't matter. So actually, the second method allows our human object to change their name when they want. This is often referred to as a setter method because it sets one of an object instance variable to a new value and returns nothing because it is void. The last method allows others to read the age, get age. And this kind of method is referred to as a getter method because it gets and returns one of an object. So here we look at the main concept of object-oriented. We look at the setter, getter method, which are very important. And now we want to see that if we want to define a string class in a wrapper around an order sequence of characters, what we need to do, right? So we already have some example of this previously, but I'm gonna explain it again. So what are the system objects? So this kind of object contain many interfaces to the environment. I mean the Java Eclipse, and then displaying text and getting the time, setting something, and so forth. So objects in Java can be referred to this diagram. So one object has many attributes like class, data, and methods. So we talk about the class name like human, and we talk about the data, which are attributes, name, age, height, weight, and then are actually the variables within the class. And then we do have the method like main, get names, get age, set name, right? So as I said, we do have a getter and setter, and we do have a message. So, and then sometimes we need to consider void, or sometimes we need to return something that I'm gonna talk about this later. So let's go to the next one. So I'm just briefly gonna explain another class to make it clear for you. Here you can see that we do have a class of dog, right? So, and we do have different type of dots, and then we do have the attributes of different type like age and color, and that based on those attributes we can distinguish between different objects in a class or different instances. And then behaviors or methods can be sleeping, eating. So another example of the class can be an abstract class of the shape. So it can be public double area. When we don't have the void in here, instead we do have a data type like double, integer, a string, then we say this class gonna return something. Okay, so we do have this method in here, public double read. Public double area. We're going to calculate the area for the rectangular and circle. They are the child of this class, the instances of this class. So we do declare different variable and do have a method within this instance. And in here, we do have to declare another variable, and we do have some other function to calculate the area. Sorry, just oh my god. And then we're gonna concentrate of the classes that which gonna return something. In this particular example, we're gonna return the area for two child which are rectangular and circle. So you can start writing this algorithm, so it's already written, but you can just shape it into the Eclipse and test it. So this is a good exercise for you. So we talk about, so let's just do a quick recap to continue. We talk about the methods, and we say we do have a main method in our Java programming that everything should be called in there to be executed and get some outcome. So methods consist of number of lines of the program, and so we had some setter, getter, and different type of methodology. So let's go to the next one. So object-oriented programming, so you need to provide some interaction between the different classes, different methods. So for example, you should be able to call something from one class, from another class, and then you can define something in some class, and then you don't need to define it in another class. Sometimes you're gonna use the trigger, actually messages, trigger the object to change their data. So we're going to talk about this later on, and we're going to look at the functionality of that. And sometimes we need to calculate something, compute something like the area during the class by defining different methods. So as we said, we do have the main. Don't forget about the main. Whatever you learned in the structure programming, it was in main. Then we have to define the classes after main. So let's just do another recap based on this example. So consider this program. We have a class definition in here. The class name is object example, and then we do have declared different variable in here. So we do have declared class variables. As you see, the syntax, they are private. They can be accessed just inside this class, not outside, because they are private. And then we do have a public method, a special method called a constructor, which have two arguments. So needs two inputs, one a string and one integer. And what is the method name? Is object example. Actually, is the main methodology in your class. So you do have these two input, and then you assign it to different variable inside this method. And then you do have another method which called print, is void, doesn't return anything. And then you do have to some trigger, right? So you're gonna send some message based on different variable. As you see, age is not defined in here, however, is defined in the main class, so you don't need to define it every time. And then you have another method, the main one, which is void main. If you remember, we need to, I said that we need to call everything inside this. So we need to say, for example, we have two objects in here. So objects are the child of this class that we declare in here with one string argument and the second integer. So, and then we're gonna ask for some output. So, yeah. So let's look at this part a little bit in more detail. So the method name follow the same naming standard as any variable. They can have their own variable, which are the local variable. So like a private one, they are defined within the classes, and then typically read and write or change and set, getter and setter object variable are defined in different methods. So you can pass parameter during the arguments, as I said, the two inputs, by declaring the arguments, and then you can use the parameter when you are not returning value. So you're using the void, right? So you're using the void print. Actually, you don't return anything. So look at another example. So in here, I am telling you, so to write something here, I need to just change something for you. Okay, so I needed to change something in here because it was incorrect. So I just wanted to tell you that within the main method, which is void and doesn't return anything, we do have this style. What we're gonna do, I'm gonna explain in the next part, that it may seem a little strange that we are creating object, but the same type as the class. Do you know why? So let's look at this example. So if we want to look at this whole example for the class object, I think is a better idea to just summarize everything that we learn. So if you look at this, we're going to start from here. We're going to see that we do have the constructor, we do have methods, and we do have some objects and classes in here. So first of all, we define a class, which is public class, and the name of this class is object example. Within this class, we're gonna define different variable as a private. It can be accessed just within this class. So for example, if I want to say age in here, I say what is age? It's not declared because it's private, it's not public. So when you use another method, sorry, so then you are not able to use that, right? So you need to access public, then even you have age and name in here doesn't matter, but because it's private now, we don't have age and name in here. So another one is the constructor. We define constructor and we assign some value, Lily and 21, right? So we do have arguments as an input, a string and int, a string for the name and int for the age. And then we do have another method, which is print. And then we're gonna see that we want to print this sentence. We want to say the name, for example, Lily is of age of this, years old. And then we do have a main part that we always need to have it. So, and then what we're gonna do inside main method, so we're gonna just call. We're gonna call different object. We're gonna say Lily object is one instance of this class object example, and we want to construct these two value. We want to assign these two value to this object within this class, and the same in here. And then we want to call print. We want to print something, then we need to say this object dot print. Accessing a method for an object can be by dot. So the method, you define it in here. Here, you need to say this object, you declare this object in here, and you say dot any method, print, speak, age, or anything else. So in here, you can see that there is the outcome, so you can test it yourself and then to check that if you get the same result. So thank you for listening. Next week, we're gonna look at the arrays and a little bit more detail for loops. Thank you very much, and hopefully see you soon.